Hey kids, you've probably seen this scene in TV or movies at some point. A couple of people end up stranded on a desert island, totally isolated from all civilization. It seems like there's no hope for survival, but then one of them looks 3 feet to the left and, oh my god, it's a tree full of fully grown, plump, delicious, smiling, golden skinned bananas. Amazing. We're saved for the time being. Hey, don't eat those. They're made of lies. See? Listen, why do fruit exist? For a delicious, nutritious snack for humans and animals alike to enjoy? You know, you didn't have to go throwing him into the sun like that.
You're next, Susan!
How did you know my name? I created you. Anyway, as most of you probably know, fruit are a thing because nature figured out, hey, if you put a little bit of deliciousness around your seed, it'll convince some idiot bird or something to carry your baby off to faraway lands, right? But then humans showed up and were like, hey, that's pretty nifty. Listen, is it cool if we selectively breed you for thousands of years to give you horrific deformities to crank up that whole deliciousness part a couple hundred notches? Alright, cool. Let's take a look at bananas, specifically the Cavendish variety that we all know and love. On the inside, we got like 2% seeds, 93% delectable banana meat, and 5% that brown part at the bottom that your mom says is perfectly fine to eat but you still don't trust. Great for a snack. Terrible for reproducing efficiently. Meanwhile, check out the thing on the right here. That's Musa acuminata, one of the suspected ancestors of today's nanners. Much smaller and jam-packed with seeds, with just enough flesh in there to make it worth some smelly primate's time to crack open a yellow one with the boys. Here's another wild-type banana, Musa balbesiana. Less sweet, way starchier, harder to get into, hella seeds, same shit different day really. But hey, if you stick that boy in the ground, you've got an okay chance of making a new banana tree. You bury a modern banana, all you're gonna end up with is a dirty banana. And not that one club in Miami, I mean an actual dirty banana. That's because, like a lot of cultivated fruit, culinary bananas are so inbred and malformed that they can't produce offspring even if they wanted to. So, word of advice for you men out there, if ever a lady points out how poorly endowed you are, just show her this JPEG. She'll say, wow, I didn't realize it was so potent and fertile. You really opened my eyes, thank you. Bananas aren't the only piece of produce to follow this pattern though, not by a long shot. For example, take the watermelon. According to Monsanto, everybody's favorite corporation, the first evidence of human cultivation of the watermelon dates back to Egypt around 5,000 years ago. Back then, they were only 2 inches in diameter, around the size of a tennis ball. The flesh was supposedly tough and bitter, much like that of a tennis ball. Of course, just as the growth of a delicious green baby takes time, so too did the evolution of the modern watermelon. In fact, even as late as the mid-1600s, watermelons looked way different from what we have today, as shown by this painting by Giovanni Stanchi. Notice the thicker rind, the larger seeds, and the weird segmentation on the inside. Definitely a cooler still life subject, but ultimately inferior as a summertime snack. How about vegetables? Tell me, do you enjoy cabbage, Brussels sprouts, kale, collard greens, broccoli, or cauliflower? I mean, I guess I like broccoli and cauliflower. The rest are kind of gross though.
Wrong! All 6 of these vegetables are actually the same thing. That means you like them all.
That's not how that works. I'll be good. Anyway, these veggies are all just cultivars of the same species, Brassica oleracea, otherwise known as wild cabbage. Every part of the plant is edible to some extent, but there's not much of it to go around. So a bunch of different people throughout history said, alright, what if we just take one specific part of the plant and go fucking insane with it? And that's what they did. Those who bred for giant leaves got kale, going for huge dense flower buds gets you broccoli, juicy engorged lateral leaf buds equal Brussels sprouts, etc. Speaking of segues, let's check out eggplants. The OG eggplant was first domesticated in India, where it can still be found in the wild today. It looks nothing like an eggplant though, they actually resemble little green berries the size of grapes. The only thing it seems to have in common with the classic purple eggplant is how little both of them have in common with an egg. However, if we add the RGB percentage values of their color and merge their shapes, we do get what looks approximately like an egg, so I guess that solves that mystery. This whole transformation really is a testament to man's greatness though. That's like starting out with a frog and selectively breeding them until you end up with Grimace from McDonald's lore. Speaking of which, did you know Grimace used to be evil and have 4 arms? This is a real thing. I'd like to think that when they lopped off his extra limbs, all his evil energy went with him, and now there's just 2 plump purple cylinders scampering around the countryside waiting to pull unsuspecting kids under ball pits, never to be seen again. That's just my McDonald's headcanon though. Anyway, back to whatever we were talking about. Next is corn, or sorry, maize. I call it corn like a normal person. If it was supposed to be called maize, these would be called mazes. Obviously, that's like the perfect opportunity, but they're not, so put an etymological sock in it. Or stocking. Anyway, I was totally expecting old corn to look like those baby corns you find in Chinese food and literally nowhere else. Turns out those actually are just baby corns. One suspected ancestor of corn is known as teosinte, which looks like this. Gee whiz, Sam, that sure does look like garbage. Good eye, Billy. That's because it was garbage. Whereas modern corn has a kernel count in the hundreds, teosinte only has 5 to 12, with each one being encased in a hard shell that's basically impossible to get into short of boiling it or chipping a tooth. The fact that people decided to domesticate it in the first place makes sense once you realize that most grains are basically the same thing. But honestly, that just makes me wish people figured out how to turn a piece of wheat into a big chunk of whatever to gnaw on. This whole thing disappointed me so much that I actually moved it to the top of my list of reasons not to visit the Mayans if I ever get a time machine. Nonetheless, as you can see, human endeavor can accomplish amazing things. And just as a few thousand years of selective breeding can turn this into this, a few hours of learning a week can turn you into, you know, a more talented and interesting version of you. Anyway, till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and thank you for watching. Mentorship. What the Hey kids, whether you're a precocious young lad down by the swimming hole or a grizzled crime scene investigator, everybody's got some interest in dead bodies. Yes, from Weekend at Bernie's to Weekend at Bernie's 2 to Weekend at Bernie's 3 Revelations, stories about wayward corpses have certainly carved their niche in today's media. So, I thought I'd spin a few yarns about some real-life people who were kept out far past their expiration date. Our first tale follows one Elmer McCurdy. He was an outlaw during the twilight days of the Wild West. Thanks to his former life as a miner, McCurdy acted as the demolitions expert to his little posse, using nitroglycerin basically any time he had the faintest excuse to do so. Except, he was kind of a moron, so it didn't usually go quite as planned. Gotta say, after peanut butter and chocolate, my favorite combination of two things is probably gross incompetence and high explosives. Example, in March of 1911, McCurdy's band of rabble-rousers found out that $4,000 were in a safe in an approaching train. They managed to stop the entire locomotive, I don't even know how you do that, break in, hold everyone on board hostage, and locate the safe. McCurdy steps up to plate, right? Gotta blast the thing open, except I guess the excitement kinda got to him, cause he ended up using like way too much nitroglycerin, like inordinate amounts. Ended up completely destroying the safe and its contents, and what few silver coins they made out with were literally melted to the frame of the safe and had to be peeled off. Anyway, he died in a shootout with police later that year, and the undertaker at the funeral home he was sent to couldn't find any next of kin on account of McCurdy being a rambling low-life varmint. So he just embalmed the hell out of him and said, "Hey boys and girls, wanna see a dead criminal? Only one shiny nickel." And since LiveLeak wasn't around at the time, there weren't many places a kid could go to stare at a corpse for a while if he or she so desired. So it actually became a pretty popular attraction. Visitors would pay their dues by physically slipping the coin into the man's mouth, and the creepy ass undertaker would come fish him out later, probably with bare hands all slowly and sensual-like. A few years passed when a couple of guys showed up claiming to be McCurdy's brothers with a note from the local sheriff to back it up. They told the undertaker they had permission to go bury McCurdy, so he reluctantly relinquished the body to the men. Except, these guys weren't his brothers. They were just a couple of crusty freaking carnies. They shipped the body off to Kansas to become an attraction in the traveling show. From here, McCurdy traded hands a few more times. At one point, he was exploited for this one guy's film about narcotics. It was like, yeah, this pill-popping degenerate got shot while trying to rob a pharmacy for more dope the other day. The body was super old by then, so people were like, wait, why is he all desiccated and flaky and gross? He just goes, yep, that's what happens when you do drugs, kids. Your fucking skin falls off. Stay above the influence. At some point in his journey, he ended up getting coated in wax and paint to look a little less rotty, before ending up in a warehouse in 1949. Here's the thing, he was in there alongside some actual wax figures, and after spending 19 years in storage, nobody knew he was a real corpse anymore, so he ended up getting sold in 1968 as a mannequin to one Spoonie Singh, owner of the Hollywood Wax Museum. He tried to lend the guy out a couple times during his stay, but people found him too gross or unrealistic looking for whatever whatever purposes they had in mind. So he ended up getting sold again and used as a prop of a hanged man at the Pike Amusement Zone in their Funhouse ride, with zero knowledge that he was an actual dead criminal. It wasn't until 1976, 65 years after his death, that an episode of The $6 Million Man was being filmed at the complex, and a stagehand tried to move the prop around only to have its arm break off in his hand. He was like, ugh, lousy stiff. Wait a minute, that's curious. This mannequin's got human flesh and bones inside of it. Wait a minute. Uh-oh. The autopsy confirmed what everyone present at the time suspected. By this point, the body was so dried out and stale that it only weighed 50 pounds, which makes me think we should start a radical new fad diet where we just get people to mummify parts of their body. Like, Jenny, guess what? I just lost 30 pounds in 5 days. Wow, holy heck, how'd you do that? They call it the Egyptian cleanse. Anyway, with that, McCurdy was finally laid to rest back in his homeland of Oklahoma, and that film crew's lives were never the same again. Flashback to late 18th century.
Baloney.
There lived a physician by the name of Luigi Galvani. This guy was a big deal. He's the dude who discovered that, hey, animals got electricity in them. And his legacy still survives today in words like galvanize. One of his most famous experiments was the one where he used static electricity to make frog legs twitch on command. Around these parts, we call that the French salute. Stereotypes funny. Well, in 1803, his nephew, Giovanni Aldini, said, hey, that's pretty nifty and all, but what if we tried it on people? So the city of London was like, hey, now you're thinking with portals. One freshly executed criminal coming up. Aldini gathered a crowd and applied 2 diodes to the corpse's head, causing his face to scrunch up and one eye to flick open. Aldini was a showman though, he wanted some real action, so he then put the current through opposite points in the body, which made the whole thing flail around like Pinocchio in heat. Now today we know he was just exciting the dead muscles, right? But the people who were watching had no idea what was going on, so they were like, Jesus Christ, this guy's a fucking necromancer. Quick, go get grandma, maybe we can get in the will after all. Fun fact, this experiment actually ended up serving as inspiration for Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which makes me wonder what other famous novels were based on real life events. Was a white whale ever pursued by a vengeful sea captain? Was there actually a mentally handicapped migrant worker who liked hugging rabbits to death? Was there ever a human soul as profoundly asinine and willfully ignorant as Amelia Bedelia? God, I hate her glassy-eyed face so fucking much. I just want to mash it into a running waffle maker, be like, huh, isn't that ironic? Grab her by her vacant fucking head, throw her out of a 747 and say, hey, why didn't you shoot yourself when you had the chance? Get it! Anyway, one thing we learned today is the importance of reputability. By the way, this video ended up being way too long, so stay tuned for part 2 in a week or two. Anyway, that's all for today. Till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and thank you for watching.
Hey kids, do you like fashionable, high-quality apparel at an affordable price? Well, too bad, cause that's not what we're talking about today. I'm gonna learn you all a thing or two about the real banana republics. Our story begins during the turn of the 20th century in Central and South America. Agriculture's kind of a big deal right now. You've got a ton of little plantations all over the place growing bananas, sugar, pineapples, that kind of thing. And they're doing alright for themselves, no big deal. But then refrigeration happened, and it changed everything. Because now produce could be kept fresh for way longer in transit, meaning the fruit companies could suddenly open up their business to the international market, their biggest new trade partner being the United States. This massive opportunity gave rise to 3 main companies, known as the United Fruit Company, Cuyamel Fruit Company, and the Vaccaro Bros. By growing, shipping, and selling fruit, these 3 firms made just obscene amounts of money, a lot of which went towards buying out smaller family-owned farms and plantations. This allowed them to make even obscener amounts of money, until eventually the only competition that remained was each other. And then shit got real. The year is 1910. One of the companies I mentioned, Cuyamel, was doing most of its business in the country of Honduras, when the president of Honduras, Miguel Davila, decided to give a land grant to the Vaccaro Bros in exchange for helping to build some roadways. In doing so, they basically stole a bunch of Cuyamel's potential plantations and gave them to a competitor. So Samuel Zamuri, owner of Cuyamel, said to himself, dang, I hate those guys. If only there was some way for a guy like me to significantly influence the world around him for his own personal gain. Wait a minute. So he used a portion of his McDuck-esque fortune to hire a mercenary army, which he gave to one of his friends, former Honduran President Manuel Bonilla. And together, they overthrew the entire fucking government of Honduras. Yeah. Should've called it Cuyamel. Anyway, Bonilla took power and gave very generous concessions to Cuyamel and United as thanks. But then America saw this, and they were like, hey, that's not very freedom of you, young man. To which Zemery replied, it's okay, we're gonna help this country succeed. After all, politics and business are essentially the same thing. Well, I suppose it's not our place to be policing the governments of other nations, yet. Still though, maybe— Oh, also? Nanners. Alright, I'm sold, do what you want. So with their interests secured, the businesses continued to thrive and expand. But since they got cut so many breaks by the government, very little of their commerce actually ended up benefiting Honduras as a whole. In fact, the national debt of Honduras got so bad that the government ended up not being able to perform a lot of its functions. So in response, the three fruit companies stepped in and said, no worries, we got this, and decided to basically build the nation's infrastructure for them, including roads, railways, shipping lines, telegraphs, telephone lines, radio towers. They even switch the whole country off to the US dollar. Keep in mind, this wasn't out of the goodness of their hearts. It was mostly just to make their own businesses function more efficiently. But it was helpful either way. Anyway, now, not only did they have total power over their plantations, but also a monopoly over nearly every major industry in the country. Many other Central American nations soon followed this pattern, creating a corrupt sort of symbiosis whereby the fruit companies get huge tax breaks and land grants in exchange for a modernized infrastructure and payoffs to the rich minority. And so, the banana republics were born. Sounds like a pretty sweet gig, right? And it was. For the upper 5% of the populations who happen to hold some direct share in the plantations or shipping lines. For your average Jose, though, life mostly consisted of working on land that wasn't even theirs in exchange for dirt poor wages. So that's how things were for like a decade and a half. At some point, Cuyamel was bought out by United, but then Zamore became the owner of the whole thing, somehow, and the Vaccaro company was renamed as Standard Fruit. Then one day, in 1944, the country of Guatemala had a democratic revolution, and the newly elected leader, Juan José Arevalo, wasn't happy with how the companies treated his people. So he implemented several reforms, like a minimum wage law and universal suffrage. And while the populace got a lot of benefit out of this, United Fruit most certainly did not. Because more rights for their workers means less profits for the business as a whole. Then Guatemala got a new president, Jacobo Arbenz, and he continued these reforms. And United continued to get the metaphorical shaft until finally, in 1953, they decided to go to the USA for help. Oh, Eisenhower. Yo, what's up? This Jacobo guy, he's making us pay minimum wages. Well, that doesn't sound very good for business. That's not all, though. He's also taking our unused land and giving it back to the people. Does that sound familiar? Oh dear. You don't think. By the way it's looking, Dwight, I'd say he's a dirty, oh god, collectivizing, no, commie. Commie! Commie! Yeah, go get him, Dwight. Holy shit, you actually did it. World Star! And from that point onward, Guatemala was ruled by a series of US-backed dictatorships, all the way up until 1996. This kind of situation happened in several other places and times as well, almost always driven by some combination of red fear and yellow love. I won't give any more details for the sake of time, but that doesn't mean they weren't big deals. So you might be wondering, where did these companies go? Surely the Clan of Banana Shenanigans can't still be around today. Well, that's where you're wrong. They're still in operation, just under different names. Standard Fruit changed their name in 1991 to become none other than Dole Food Company. You know, when I was a kid, I used to play a lot of Super Monkey Ball, and I used to wonder, what kind of cruel tyrant would just stick an ape in a ball for their own amusement? Well, now I know. Those bastards. As for United, one day in 1976, their CEO decided he couldn't take the heat anymore, so he jumped out the fucking window. That's a real thing, look it up. Then some other guy bought the company and renamed it to, drumroll please, Chiquita Banana. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. The face you once knew as an innocent, fun-loving dancer-slash-fruit merchant is actually a ruthless tyrant who overthrows democracies and undermines basic human rights for her own profit. Anyway, that's all for today. Till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and thank you for watching.
Hey kids, you're probably familiar with at least a few characters whose obsessive penny pinching truly knows no bounds. Yes, from Ebenezer Scrooge to Scrooge McDuck, nobody hoards money quite like misers. But these guys aren't the most miserly misers out there, not by a long shot. First of all, look at their top hats, their extravagant use of glasses, their luxurious chairs. These things are worth their weight in precious shekels. No true miser would waste their wealth on such frills. Second of all, these guys aren't real. They're fictional characters. Scrooge McDuck does not exist. I don't care what CNN says, it's all liberal conspiracy bullshit. I mean, look at this article by the Huffington Post. You mean to tell me that this picture isn't photoshopped? Ridiculous. But you know who was real? One Daniel Dancer of London, England. Born in 1716, Daniel's father died at a young age, leaving behind a large agricultural estate for Daniel to oversee. When it was first inherited, the property brought in a few £100s a year, which doesn't sound like much today, but given that a general laborer could be expected to make around £19 per year in 1710, it's safe to say that Dancer could afford to live a fairly lavish lifestyle off his passive income alone. But Dan was like, you know, all this food and clothing and stuff is alright, but you know what I really like? Owning money. Say, how much does a pound cost? Well, that's a complicated question, Daniel. Can currency really be said to have intrinsic value? Some economists believe that— TLDR, please. They cost a pound. Jesus, that's a lot. I better start saving. Thus began one of the most intentionally frugal lifestyles history has ever seen. Let me walk you through a few of Dancer's day-to-day habits. First of all, soap, don't even think about it. The closest thing to bathing that Daniel did was during the summer months when, once or twice a week, he'd wade into the nearby pond and scrub his face with a handful of sand. Say what you will, but what he lacked in deodorization, he certainly made up for in exfoliation. Admittedly, all of London probably reeked to high hell back then, so while Daniel's smell might not have tipped people off to his eccentricity, his clothes almost certainly did. On a good day, he'd be seen in one of his coats, which were homemade patchwork abominations of various garments that Dancer found on the streets and local dust heaps, looking like a walking dementia patient sewing circle. Similarly, all his shoes were either scavenged or Frankensteined out of other pairs of shoes he already owned, with the whole ensemble being barely held together with haphazardly tied bands made of the hay grown on his estate. In fact, a lot of the time, he ditched normal clothes altogether and just wear the hay. To his credit, in his youth, Daniel was known to purchase a whole 2 shirts per year as his clothing expense, but one day he looked in the mirror and said, "Daniel, you're bleeding funds like a stuck pig. It's time to grow up and get your act together," and cut his budget to only 1 shirt per year. One of the few people that Daniel associated with regularly was his sister, whom he lived with. Believe it or not, she shared in a lot of Daniel's tight-fisted habits, and it definitely showed. She was described as, quote, having more the appearance of a walking dunghill than one of the fair sex. Couldn't have said it better myself, honestly. Dancer prepared all of his food for the upcoming week ahead of time, consisting of only 14 hard dumplings and 3 pounds of beef stretched out over the entire 7-day period. Every day, he'd eat only a single meal that was basically equivalent to 2 wads of dried out dough and 1.5 quarter-pounder patties from McDonald's. He kept this habit up for years without fail, except for one time when he stumbled upon a fully intact, rotting sheep carcass during his daily stroll. He was like, "Good lord, this is just obscene. Who would leave a perfectly good pile of arguably edible meat and organs just sitting around like this?" So he dragged the thing home and made him and his sister a nice big pile of spoiled mutton pies, which they subsisted off of for several weeks. That's a real life hack right there. Who needs refrigeration if it's already rancid, am I right? Despite Daniel's rabid fear of any unnecessary spending, he did own a dog named Bob that he was quite fond of. At this point, I'm almost certain that Dancer just decided to base his entire life off of linoleum by no effect, which is pretty incredible considering linoleum wasn't even invented for another 100 years. Anyway though, one day, Daniel's neighbor came to complain about how Bob had been harassing his sheep. So Daniel said, "Don't worry boy, I ain't gonna kill you, but we don't want a lawsuit on our hands, do we?" "No we don't. What would we do if a lawyer came around here, huh?" "That's right, and make his children watch, yeah." So he decided to take the dog to the local farrier, which is basically a blacksmith that specializes in horseshoes and the like. "Hey, could you make my dog, like, not have teeth anymore?" What kind of business you think I'm running here, boy?" "Come on, man, you file down horses' hooves for a living. Teeth are just tiny mouth hooves. That's close." "Sorry, buddy, but close only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades." Well, got me there. Say, what's a hand grenade? None of my sources say what happened to the dog after his untimely nubbening, but I do know Dan never got sued, so I guess the operation was a success. Daniel's sister passed away in 1766, leaving him so distraught that he actually went out of his way to buy mourning clothes for her funeral. And by that I mean he bought a pair of secondhand black stockings, and that's it. Still, that's a big deal when it comes to the likes of Dancer. At this point, the only person close to a friend that Dancer had was a woman known as Lady Tempest. She was so influential over him that she was actually able to convince him to buy, get this, a 1 shilling hat. This was quite an accomplishment, as Daniel's last hat was older than half of you at 14 years old.
What? I'm not. You don't.
Meow.
You.
Of course, the next time Lady Tempest went to hang out with him, he was still wearing his old disgusting hat. When questioned about the one he bought, he goes, "Oh yeah, that frilly old thing. Sold it for a 6 pence profit. Super easy too. I tell you, forget house flipping. Hat flipping's gonna be the cool new thing pretty soon." Lo and behold, 250 years later, he was wrong. Daniel died at the ripe old age of 78, which seems pretty shocking considering the whole not using soap, eating rotten food thing, but I guess his near total isolation from other people made up for that when it came to preventing illness. Though he never ended up shelling out any of the massive hoard of wealth that he accumulated over this time, his efforts weren't completely in vain. By the time he passed away, Daniel's estate was now pulling in about £3,000 in yearly net revenue, 10 times the amount it earned when he first inherited it. So, moral of the story, parsimony has its place. While it's good to save money, don't torture yourself just for the sake of a few bucks. Next time your parent or significant other insists on turning down the thermostat or keeping the windows up to save gas, just say, hey, are we human or are we Dancer? Till next time, I'm Sam Nella, and thank you for watching. Hey kids, now we all know that fate is a fickle thing. Some of us may try to defy its will, but there's enough small businesses with Pizza Hut roofs out there to tell you that such a thing is ultimately futile. As for most of us, we tend to have our fair share of good and bad luck throughout our lives, but every now and then, RN Jesus smiles upon some drooling little loaf child and says,
"You, my son, you shall be the one with all the figgy pudding."
That child was Timothy Dexter. Dexter was born in Malden, Massachusetts in 1747. He had a humble upbringing, dropping out of school as an 8-year-old to work as a farmhand and a leather worker. But Dexter thought he deserved better, so when he grew up, he married one Elizabeth Frothingham, a rich widow in need of company. Gold digging achieved, he began his quest to become a true aristocrat. As his first step, he thinks, all the rich guys I know are in positions of power. I should run for office. Now, the town of Malden wasn't much keen on appointing a bumbling second-grade dropout, but after rejecting dozens of petitions sent in by Dexter, they eventually gave up and decided to just make some shit up, leading to Dexter becoming the official informer of deer, tasking him with keeping logs on the local deer population. And over statistics of does and bucks alike, Dexter ruled with an iron fist, triumphantly concluding what many had already known: that there weren't any deer in Malden, Massachusetts. Satisfied with his political career, Dexter then set his sights on greater financial ventures. So a little history, in 1775, as part of our growing independence from Britain, the Continental Congress decided to establish their own currency, known as the Continental Dollar, real creative there. Then the Revolutionary War started, and it dawned on people that these pieces of paper wouldn't be very useful in a giant pile of wet tea and smoldering patriots, causing their value to do one of those horny eagle death spirals. Then the Congress did, that stupid thing that every high schooler learns is stupid, not invading Russia in winter but the other one, practically making them worth less than their weight in paper and ink. And wouldn't you know it, a good portion of the Continental Army was paid with these, so by the time the war ended, many veterans were left totally destitute. The aristocrats were like, well, these grass-eating Untermensches did kind of give us a country, so whatever, we'll throw them a few cents and take this trash off their hands. Dexter was like, ooh, I'm a wealthman, I'm gonna do that too. And he spent the majority of his savings buying a boatload after boatload of the 1780s equivalent of Blockbuster gift cards. By all accounts, this should have been his ruin, but by some stroke of luck, after the Constitution was ratified, the new government decided that they'd trade Continentals for treasury bonds worth 1% of their face value. Doesn't sound like much, but keep in mind, Dexter bought thousands of crates of bills for fractions of pennies apiece. So as buybacks began across the country, his stockpile appreciated massively in value, and this informer of deer realized that, for the first time, there were a lot of bucks in Malden. But just because he was now a man of the upper crust doesn't mean he let it go to his head. head. Sure, he might have purchased the most luxurious chateau that money could buy, through daily Playboy Mansion-style ragers, and commissioned over 40 statues of America's greatest heroes, one of which was of himself, with a plaque calling him, quote, the greatest philosopher in the Western world. Despite his incredibly tacky displays of wealth, his contemptuous contemporaries still saw him for the loud, illiterate rube he was. So they started giving him deliberately awful investment tips in order to get him to bankrupt himself. One such piece of advice was that he should ship warming pans to the Caribbean. For those of you born after 1850, a warming pan's this dish on a long pole that you fill up with hot coals to warm up your bed. Not much use in a tropical paradise. But Dexter was undeterred by such frivolous things as logic. Went ahead and sent over 40,000 of them to the West Indies. When they arrived, the locals didn't really know what they were looking at and decided to use them as ladles for the sugar and molasses refineries. And by the end of it, Dexter sold every single one at a markup of nearly 80%. Frustrated that their plan backfired, the elites then told him to literally carry coal to Newcastle, which is an old idiom used to describe a pointless task based off the fact that Newcastle was one of the world's biggest producers of coal. The only idioms Dexter knew about all involved different animals shitting in the woods, so he took their word on good faith and went along with it. But by some divine providence, by the time the shipment arrived, the Newcastle coal miners had all gone on strike, and Dexter once again cleared the entire shipment with a hefty profit. He was like, man, I am so smart. By this point, he was pretty confident in his speculation skills, so he started making seemingly far-fetched ventures all by himself. One time he had a bunch of stray cats rounded up for basically free, which sounds like herding cats, but what do I know? And he sent them to the Caribbean, where they were gobbled up en masse. Not like eaten, but purchased to deal with all the rat infestations. In another instance, he bought up just about every whalebone in Boston. And coincidentally, at the same time in France, men started wearing corsets too for some reason. Demand went way up, Dexter's laughing. Now, from an outside perspective, at the end of the day, Dexter was a very shrewd merchant. So at this point in my research, I was like, wait a minute, is he smart? Then I learned about his life outside of business. Dexter considered himself extremely knowledgeable on just about every topic. Keywords, considered himself. For example, he once stumbled upon a guy painting a sign to go along with the newly built statue of Jefferson. And when he saw that the sign called Jefferson the writer of the Declaration of Independence, Dexter lost his frickin' mind and insisted that Jefferson did not pen the DOI, but rather the Constitution. Spoiler alert, not remotely true, he was in France at the time. An easy mistake to make today, sure, but this was only like 10 years after the fact. That's like someone today saying, Obama didn't kill Bin Laden, dumbass. That was Bill Clinton. Anyway, when the painter refused to change the inscription, Dexter started shooting at him with a long rifle until he complied. Real genteel. Dexter made sure to surround himself with the requisite number of weirdos to maintain this level of delusion, one of which was Jonathan Plummer, a man whom Dexter paid to be his poet laureate, writing only the most laudatory odes in his honor. Mind you, this wasn't just your run-of-the-mill, wise-and-wizened wordsmith. Jonathan sold fish for a living. And porn. He just kind of went along with the whole thing for the pocket change. Besides his entourage, Dexter occasionally spent time with the total geeds known as his family. He had 2 children, whom the New England Historical Society describes as a half-mad drunk and a completely mad drunk, respectively. And he couldn't stand his wife on account of her perceived constant nagging, to the point where he would tell guests he was unmarried and that he just had a ghost in his house. Just like, oh yeah, that's a sea hag. You know, mansion built on some old Indian shipwreck or something. Timmy, please, I'm cold and my hands are rheumatic. Find it in your heart to light the fireplace for me. Yeah, plenty of that in hell, you banshee bitch. One day, in a massive stroke of ego, Dexter decided to fake his own death, complete with a lavish funeral service just to see who would show up. Lucky for him, about 3,000 people from all walks of life turned up. Though initially staying out of sight, he soon noticed that his wife wasn't crying. So in response, he jumped out and started hitting her upside the head with a cane in front of everybody. But as his true mortality grew closer, Dexter knew he needed a legacy and decided to pen his memoirs, titled A Pickle for the Knowing Ones, which was basically just 20 pages of unhinged ranting about politics, religion, his wife, and whatever else came to mind. No punctuation, random capitalization, the most amazing spelling I've ever seen. Here's some excerpts. George Washington. Attitude, philosopher, tobacco, general. And this is all just from the first few lines. The entire book is written like this. And just like everything else the guy did, the thing sold like fucking hotcakes. Why does anybody even try? The best part is that when he got complaints about the total lack of grammatical anything, in the second edition of the book, he put an extra page at the end full of nothing but punctuation marks, with a little note saying that anyone who felt like whining could just stick them wherever they wanted. Dexter died in 1806, and by and large, he probably should have ended up in Davy Jones's his locker, but given the circumstances, I imagine the big man upstairs dropped his big deck of Mortal Soul trading cards at just the right moment, letting him slip through the pearly gates undetected. And legend has it that to this day, if you pray to the name Timothy Dexter, he'll look upon you kindly and share his skills with you all. Anyway, that's all for today. Till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and thank you for watching. Hey Majors, so I'd like to start off with a little biology lesson. When a species finds itself living on an island, it can start to evolve in strange ways based on the different pressures applied by the new environment. This is called island syndrome, and while it can manifest in a lot of ways, the biggest driving force is often a lack of predators. For example, the dodo lost its ability to fly since there was nothing to flee from. The Saint Kilda field mouse got twice as big since it no longer had to hide. And with no one around to bully them, the Sardinians started putting maggots in their cheese. Meet kazumarzu, literal translation, rotten cheese. It's made by taking a perfectly good wheel of pecorino and letting a special type of fly lay eggs in it. The fly babies then work to partially digest the cheese, rendering it goopy and wet and maybe quite tasty and worm-filled. Now, cheese as a concept is already quite suspect. It's clotted milk that you fill with bacteria and mold and let sit for a while. But cheese is safe and delicious. Cheese is my friend. I trust cheese. So my guard would be down around kazumarzu. I've learned to look past a cheese's childhood. Strange upbringings are what give them their character. But it turns out, those maggots are still alive, and if you don't chew well enough, they can cause enteric myiasis, which is a fancy term for fly larvae living in your intestines. Symptoms are similar to food poisoning, except with the added psychic pain of knowing that, again, your bowels are full of squiggly new friends. It's for this reason that kazumarzu is banned in the EU and elsewhere. A black market still exists, which is wild, and it's not a small one. In 2019, the illicit kazumarzu trade was estimated to be worth 2 to 3 million euros annually. Personally, I would just do it prohibition style, like definitely don't put these fly eggs on this sumptuous wheel of pecorino. But if you do, you absolutely shouldn't keep it warm and damp for a week. But although it's traditional to leave the larvae alive when you eat your mag and cheese, some consumers still prefer them dead, shockingly. In that case, one puts the cheese in a sealed bag, and when the maggots run out of oxygen, they writhe around and fling themselves all over the place. This is heard as a distinct pitter-patter against the walls of the bag, and when the sound stops, the contents are ready to eat, like popcorn. Shark fin soup is one most of us have heard about already, mostly in reference to its effect on shark populations and the wastefulness that goes into making it. Until recently though, I never looked into the nature of the dish itself. I figured, right, the fins are just the only part of the shark worth eating. Big whoop, it's probably not much different from like swordfish. Apparently though, I had it backwards. Shark fins aren't even meat. They're made almost entirely of cartilage and collagen. They are the last part we should be eating. That's why it's only made into soup, because without being soaked in broth, it has zero flavor or nutritional value on its own. Their only redeeming quality is their unique mouthfeel due to how stringily the collagen grows, in structures called ceratotrichia. The texture has been described as somewhere between chewy and crunchy, which I find describes most things, actually. Other adjectives present on Wikipedia include snappy, gelatinous, and sinewy. The exact sensation of eating this substance remains a mystery to me, and the unintended side effect of all this research is that I now really want to try it. Like, it's a big trade. I've got to be the one that's wrong. There is imitation shark fin soup available, but I've already decided that it's not nearly as good, so I've come up with a compromise to this controversy. Everyone on Earth gets just one bite. Say there's 10 bites to a fin, 4 fins to a shark, 200 million sharks die, sure, a necessary casualty, but then we can end the practice forever. All done. You can finally rest, Mr. Ming. Come here, baby. Aww. Aki. What? Aki. Where? Aki. The aki is a fruit originally from West Africa, which is most commonly associated with Jamaican cuisine, where it appears in such dishes as aki and saltfish. These alien kidneys here are called the arils, and they're the only part of the fruit that's actually eaten. Their flavor is on the savory side, being described as kinda nutty or bean-like. What makes the aki controversial, though, is the effects it can cause when prepared improperly. If the arils are allowed to completely ripen, they're harmless, but if you eat them too early, or don't thoroughly clean off all the non-aril stuff, they can cause Jamaican vomiting sickness. This disease doesn't sound real, it sounds like it belongs next to Eastern sweats and Tangerian bone grindings, but that's actually an official term, and as for symptoms, it does what it says on the tin. plus maybe death. While ackee-based products aren't outright illegal in the United States, they are very tightly regulated, and the raw fruit itself cannot be imported. So if you're American and want to try it, your options are fully cooked canned ackee or going to Florida where a few people grow it domestically. Next we have bird's nest soup. This is another one that I've vaguely heard of, and for years I just assumed the name was a playful metaphor like ants on a log or shit on a shingle. Turns out, nope, this dish contains an actual bird nest. Not like a pile of twigs like I was picturing, but rather a specific type of nest only made by certain species of swiftlets. These nests are mostly made out of mucins, which are a set of proteins that, among other things, serve to thicken all those wonderful secretions our bodies make. There's a little bit in human saliva, a little bit more in mucus, and in swiftlet saliva, look out pal. So all the swiftlet does is it finds a nice wall, starts laying out fat strings of slobber, which dry, and eventually she's got a nice place to roost. That is, right up until some gourmand says,
Today I crave bird spit. You can keep the eggs though.
And they then reconstitute it back into its original gelatinous texture. Unfortunately, these nests can't enter the US since, believe it or not, eating bird saliva is a great way to catch bird flu. And now the time has come to speak of the ortolan. The ortolan is a kind of bunting, which is a sort of passerine, which is a type of bird. They're birds. Like many animals, they have a long history of being eaten by the French, but what separates the ortolan from your average squab or pheasant is the unique way in which it is prepared and eaten. They're typically caught with nets and kept in the dark, which causes them to overeat for some reason. Once it's about twice as fat, the entire bird is then thrown into a container of brandy, alive, and sealed in. While this serves to marinate the creature, it also drowns in the process, thereby killing one bird with no stones. The ortolan is then roasted, plucked, and presented whole to the consumer, who inserts the carcass into their mouth, feet first. As they chew, one hand continues holding the bird's head, while the other picks out the larger bones. This whole ritual is usually performed with a towel or large napkin over one's head. There's a few explanations for the purpose of the towel. Some say it's just there to keep the aromas in, while others say it's there to, quote, shield from God's eyes the shame of such a decadent and disgraceful act. Yeah, this one I'm okay with not trying, actually. Notable fans of this dish include, not joking, Bill Cosby and the guy who invented the lobotomy. To be part of that social club. Our mission is to eat birds whole and then make people not remember things. Killing ortolans was banned across the EU in 2007, not for any ethical reason, but because French people did this so much that the entire ortolan population was threatened. Thankfully, as of 2018, their conservation status is under least concern, so hopefully the French can get back to it soon. Anyway, that's all I have for today. Till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and thank you for watching. Hey kids, if you've ever been Black Friday shopping or visited the Diablo subreddit recently, chances are you've encountered mass hysteria at some point. Mass hysteria is known medically as mass psychogenic illness, or MPI for short. It's basically just when a bunch of people start acting a fool for no discernible reason other than maybe a stressful environment. Being that this sort of thing is naturally very noticeable, there's loads of documented cases found all throughout history. Let's take a look at a few. This first one is what made me make this video in the first place. So one day sometime in the Middle Ages, a group of nuns in a French convent were enjoying a quiet, uneventful day, until one of them decided to start meowing. You know, like a cat. You'd think this would last all of 4 seconds before another nun was like, "Excuse me, Sister Gertrude, would you kindly cut the shit?" But instead, another nun joined in, and another, until basically the entire nunnery was exchanging mouths like a group of communist trading card enthusiasts. This wasn't just a one-time thing either, it basically became integrated into their way of life. It's said that on a given day, they would stand there meowing in each other's faces for hours at a time. Could you imagine being the first outsider to witness this? You might laugh now, but as they say, everybody gangsta till the nuns start meowing. I'd void my bowels and move to Malaysia without even thinking. Miles more terrifying than this pile of garbage. As you can imagine though, after a while it stopped being scary and just got annoying, leading to the neighbors calling in a band of soldiers to deal with the situation. Hey guys, can we talk to you for a sec about Yeah, that. All due respect, but we have orders to literally beat the hell out of you with whips till you start acting like people again. Sorry sir, it's just force of habit. Haha, habit. Seriously though, we would rather go to hell for throttling a gaggle of nuns than put up with another minute of your bullshit, caprese. Our next event took place in the parish of Fatima, Portugal in the year 1917. It all started with 3 shepherd children, ages 10, 9, and 7 respectively. They were like, "Greetings, fellow Portugueseites. We've been seeing visions of the Virgin Mary, and she told us to tell you that some real crazy shit's gonna go down in the sky on October 13th. Now, if 3 random farm children started spouting out prophecies to the public today, you'd say, "Ha, what tomfoolery. Go play in some dirt, you dirty little dirt baby." But keep in mind, the past is a different country. And Portugal's a different country, so that's like different country squared you gotta think about. Plus this was during World War I, a time where a lot of people were holding out for a miracle to begin with. So the kid's story was actually picked up and even spread by local newspapers, to the point where, when the day finally came, at least 30,000 people gathered in Fatima to witness the alleged miracle. Lo and behold, on that day, the sun began zooming around, careening towards Earth and sending rays of multicolored light cascading across the sky, creating a light show like nobody's ever seen. Keep in mind, this happened in the 20th century, way after the era where belief in divine jiggery and or pokery was considered mandatory, so naturally there were plenty of skeptics and non-believers present, and even they saw it all happen. Or so they thought. How do we know the sun didn't really whiz around haphazardly that day, Well, number 1, use your frickin' brain. And number 2, accounts differed wildly from person to person. While some say the sun zigged hither, others say it zagged thither, and others still said it shined a brilliant yellow and stayed perfectly still. As such, it was eventually concluded that the event was just a combination of MPI and weird eye stuff from too much sun staring. Although I'd like to believe it was real, just that Jesus' illusion skill was way higher than his alteration at the time. Yep, that's it. Sam's going to hell. Why, for blasphemy? Trust me, that was the least offensive part of that joke. Our next tale took place in 1962 in Tanganyika, which was basically just the beta version of Tanzania. The nation had just declared its independence from Britain the previous year, and with the future so uncertain, tensions were naturally running high around this time. One little girl in a Tanganyikan school ended up handling the stress in a bit of an unusual way. Rather than overeating or staring at her ceiling for hours like a normal person, she just started laughing, and laughing, and laughing. Pretty soon, her classmates at the all-girls school she attended began to join in, to the point where 95 of the 159 students caught the gigglies, which lasted anywhere from a few hours to 16 days straight. Beyond just the unprovoked cackling, other odd behavior included aimless running and occasional violence. The problem got so severe that the school was forced to close down temporarily, leading to the chortlers roaming the streets, spreading the affliction further. Thousands of people from all strata came to be affected, with 13 additional schools being shut down in the progress. Over the course of the hysteria, several other symptoms began to present themselves as well, ranging from obvious ones such as breathing problems, fainting, random screaming, to more anomalous things like rashes. Despite all this, no physical cause could be found, leaving MPI as the only explanation. The epidemic finally died down after between 6 and 18 months of day in, day out laughter, depending on the village. While this whole thing likely sucked for most people involved, it probably could have been worse. A lot of the time when I'm alone, I'll think to myself, man, if I ever go full schizo, I hope I'm one of the laughy ones, not one of the screamy ones. With this story in mind, just maybe, if I put my mind to it and believe hard enough, I can be both. Flashback to the year 1518 to the city of Strasbourg, at the time part of the HRE. A woman named Mrs. Trophy began fervently dancing in the streets for no discernible reason, for hours, then days. All without music, of course. Her only breaks consisted of occasional food intake and passing out from exhaustion when night came. If you saw that today, you'd just be like, ha! Drugs. But apparently people found it pretty inspiring, because within a week, 34 others had joined in, and after a month, there were around 400. This wasn't your casual bobbing up and down neither. This shit made Zumba look like Tai Chi. Here's the best modern day simulation I could find. Now imagine that both of those people were the same person and you got the dancing plague. This would take a toll on any healthy person, let alone a medieval city dweller, but despite bleeding feet and aching bones, they just kept going. In fact, they went so hard for so long that a good portion straight up fucking died from cardiac arrest. It got to the point where around 15 dancers were kicking the bucket every day before the city decided they had to do something about it. They managed to rule out any divine or supernatural causes, which was necessary just because, back in medieval times, it was fucking stupid. They eventually surmised that it was a natural disease caused by too much hot blood, as per that whole four humors thing that was popular at the time. As for a cure, their prescription was, get this, more dancing. I can see where they were coming from. It's pretty sound logic. If you got a song stuck in your head, you play it till you're sick of it, same kind of thing. But here's where they goofed. The authorities actually went out of their way to facilitate the dancing, setting up a big stage area and even hiring musicians to keep the afflicted moving. All this achieved was attracting more passerby who were like, man, mass psychogenic illness looks frickin' epic, let's get in on that, causing the contagion to become even more widespread. Seeing that their solution backfired, the city then went the other way and completely banned any public dancing. Those who still showed signs of the mania were subsequently carted off to the Shrine of St. Vitus, where an exorcism-like ritual was performed on them. This ended up being highly effective, presumably for no other reason than that the dancers believed it would work, and after nearly 2 months, the plague was quelled. While this whole thing was most likely a case of good old-fashioned MPI, some historians believe it might have been egged on in part by ergotism, a state of psychosis brought on by eating tainted bread, which I talked a little bit about in this video. Ding! Anyway, that's all for today. Till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and thank you for watching.
Hey kid. Yeah, you. I just got off the phone with the big man upstairs, and he told me that I need to clear a few things up around here. So without further ado, here's 10 pieces of malarkey that you might still be spreading. Number 1. Nobody was ever burned to death at the Salem witch trials. Of the accused, 15 died in prison, 19 were hanged, and 1 was squished to death. That last one is way more interesting than any cremation, by the way. Dude was a badass. His name was Giles Corey. He was 81 years old and so done with the town of Salem's garbage that he wouldn't even dignify the trial with a plea. So the town stuck in between 2 boards and stacked rocks on top of him in an effort to draw out a confession. But every time they tried to get something out of him, all he would say was, "More weight." This went on for 3 solid days until he finally died, never giving any indication as to whether or not he was a witch. One can only wonder. Number 2, the OG Buddha wasn't the obese guy. That's Budai, a Chinese folk character meant to represent Maitreya, aka future Buddha. Now this shirt is double sad. Number 3, Buddha wasn't a god either. He was just a guy named Gautama. Now this shirt is triple sad. Number 4. Ever heard of a vomitorium? Turns out no, it's not a place where Roman nobles would go to make room for more pheasant spleen and lobster eyelids. It's just a big entranceway to the coliseums that hordes of peasants would spew out of. Number 5. Washington never cut down a cherry tree in his youth. I don't get this one at all. Apparently it's supposed to paint the man in a good light somehow. It's like, Tyler, what the hell happened while we were gone? Where's the tree in the front yard? Oh yeah, that was me. Got bored. Just felt like vandalizing something, you know? Hey, what about my honest character? Number 6, the pyramids weren't actually built by slaves. These workers were respected members of society. They ate meat and worked in 3-month shifts, and even got to be buried right next to the tomb after their death. Matter of fact, that's more than we can say for the people working on man's greatest achievements today. If I spent years of my life helping to build the space station, you're damn right I'd want the Salmonella Memorial Corpse Receptacle floating along right next to it. That would be amazing. Number 7, the Great Wall of China is not the only man-made object visible from space. I don't know where you dipshits got this one from. First of all, there's no way you could see it with the unaided eye. The wall is like 30 meters thick at most, while the distance to outer space is generally recognized to be 100 kilometers up, known as the Kármán line. To give some perspective, that's like me holding up a standard-sized guitar pick from across the entire length of a football field and asking you what color it is. Also, there are plenty of man-made objects that are way bigger in terms of local surface area than the Great Wall, so even if it was visible, there's no way it would be the only one. Number 8, you might have heard this one before. You know, Hitler was a jerk and all, but hey, he made the Autobahn, so at least he was efficient. Actually, Hitler didn't create the Autobahn. It was already there. He just helped expand it into newer territory. In a similar vein, Mussolini didn't make the trains run on time, with most of Italy's infrastructure repairs happening before his rise to power in 1922, and even then they weren't nearly as punctual as he'd like you to believe. So unfortunately, you're gonna have to find something else to like about these fascists. Like Hitler's elegant way of speaking. Or the way Mussolini says spaghetti. Paschetti! Number 9. Iron Maidens weren't actual torture devices used in medieval times. Basically what happened is, some archaeologists in the 1800s saw an old metal coffin and some spikes, and said, yo, wouldn't it be wildin' if we put these things up in here, so that way if someone goes in it, they get poked in their bits? You are a sick man, Cornelius. I like it. Into the museum it goes. At least Iron Maiden was real. They were as real as it gets. Still are. And don't you forget it. Number 10. Einstein never failed math. He had mastered both integral and differential calculus by the age of 15. 99% chance this one was just made up to make glue eaters feel better about themselves. Well, congratulations, Dimitri. Looks like you failed pre-algebra for the 3rd time. Brady still can't graduate. Well, hey, that means I'm still on par with famous smart science man, so, yeah. Worship me. Anyway, till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and thank you for watching.
Hey kids, whenever I browse this site, I see more and more videos of people talking about things like YouTuber drama, the election, world politics, and it made me think, hey, maybe I should start covering more relevant, nuanced topics in my videos. Anyway, let's talk about chickens. So the story of the chicken begins a long time ago in Southeast Asia. Now, this area had a ton of bamboo growing all over the place. And the thing about bamboo is, it follows a very specific life cycle, where once every 50 years or so, every bamboo plant in a given region will blossom at the exact same time. Then, shortly after, they litter the whole area with these little seeds known as bamboo rice, or as I call them, bambinos. These pellets get planted, the current bamboo dies out, and the cycle starts over. Now, enter the ancestor of the domesticated chicken, known as the red jungle fowl. The jungle fowl lived in the same area as the bamboo, and, as you can imagine, they got a lot of benefit out of being literally knee-deep in food once every half-century. So much so that evolution basically said, alright, when food supplies go up, I want you to just start pumping out babies like there's no tomorrow. That way, we can take as much advantage of each bloom as possible. As a result, the chicken population became synchronized with the bamboo, shooting up during blooms and dwindling in between. Then humans showed up and they saw this pattern, and they said, wow, how bamboozling. And then they realized, wait a minute, that pun was dumb. But also, we can harness this whole chicken cycle thing. All we have to do is give these guys a whole bunch of food, and we can make their reproductive systems go into overdrive whenever we want. Do you know what that means? Lots of hot bird porn. No, it means we get as many eggs as we could ever dream of. So, with a bit of work, we managed to domesticate the chicken around 5000 BC. And as you can imagine, the idea of having a literal egg-laying machine around the house was extremely popular, leading to the chicken spreading across the entirety of the civilized world over the course of a few millennia. I think it's interesting that, despite the fact that the West has had chickens for most of its history, it wasn't until way later that we figured out where they came from. Like, alright men, it's time to delve into the world of the unknown. We're gonna see things the likes of which man has never laid eyes upon before. But, if you keep your wits about you, we just might make it out of here alive. Hey, is this yours? No? Weird. What the hell? Of course, having a constantly supercharged uterus is not without its drawbacks. After all, the chicken essentially goes through its entire menstrual cycle every day. So next time your girlfriend's complaining about how bad her period is, get her a box of chocolates and be generally attentive to her needs. You prick. Anyway, one thing with chickens and most other egg-laying critters is that they only have one hole in their pelvic region, which is called a cloaca, I think. Or cloaca. Cloaca? So the Croatia basically acts like a funnel, taking all the eggs and waste and sending it down the same chute. And while this might sound convenient at first, there is one fatal disadvantage that affects chickens in particular. Sometimes the egg can get stuck on its way out, leading to a condition known as egg binding. And since this means nothing can exit the clamato anymore, the egg-bound chicken ends up dying of constipation over the course of a couple days. Hey Jerry, how you doing? Not good, Sean. Not good. Oh man, what's wrong? It's just, ever since Jenny got egg-bound, things have been so stressful. Her funeral expenses are through the roof, and her memory means so much to me, but if the bills keep coming in like this, I'm not sure my family will be able to handle it. Well, hey man, you know what they say, don't put all your eggs in one casket. Let's just hope she doesn't get egg-zoomed. I'm sorry. Don't ever contact me or my kids ever again. I understand. Anyway, that's all for today. Till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and thank you for watching. Hey kids, remember the plague, malaria, smallpox? Kinda bad, right? Well, guess what? They're peanuts compared to the level of destruction that's been wreaked over the years across the kingdom next door. Today, I'm gonna talk about some of the most interesting diseases to ever strike the world of plants. The most famous one is probably the potato blight. It's a fungus that attacks potatoes. This is what it looks like. On the left, we have a healthy potato, while on the right, we have a blighty one. Notice how this one is noble and robust, like a lion's heart, while the other is shriveled and black, like Betsy DeVos's uterus. You could try to eat it, but it's basically like rotting cork. You wouldn't get very far. So in 1845, Ireland relied a lot on potatoes, right? That's because their soil was dumb, and that's the most nutritious thing they could grow. Then the blight came, and all their food turned to poo. 1 million starved, 2 million left. They came to America. They brought freckles, and these things. Hoity-toity-toy, now we have the Celtics. Next is the chestnut blight, which infects, you guessed it, the elderly. Wait, no, that's shingles. Chestnut blight infects American chestnut trees, which once populated a huge portion of the South and Mid-Atlantic regions of the country. Key word.
Once.
During the early 20th century, the blight arrived, which ended up killing around 4 billion trees over the course of a couple decades. Hey, remember that time 4 billion giant things died inexplicably? Me neither. Nobody does. Let me give some perspective on the situation. Those trees were huge, like 40 meters tall apiece. That means 160 million kilometers of tree was destroyed by this disease. That's long enough to get from the earth to the sun with 10 million kilometers to spare. Here's another. If we take the volume of all these trees, we get 126 billion cubic meters. If we burn that much wood, we get 861 quadrillion joules of energy. That's the amount released by the bomb dropped on Hiroshima, times 10,000. So yeah, kind of a big deal. But who cares, right? Why worry about 4 billion dumb smelly old trees when there's 1,000 whole pandas that need our help? Isn't that right, WWF? You populist scum. Anyway, moving on. This next one is called, get ready, broom rape. I'm serious. Broom rape. Broom rape. Wikipedia, broom rape. Naked broom rape. Imagine if we gave human illnesses names like that. I'm sorry, Sam, but you have urethra cactus. I would just end it right there. Doesn't even matter what the actual symptoms are. Anyway, broom rape is considered a parasitic plant. This is what it does. The seeds of the broom rape will hang out in the soil for years until the roots of a host plant come along. When they do, the broom rape bursts out of its shell and immediately starts leeching off the other organism. Eventually, once they grow enough, they'll breach the surface with these little flowers. Notice, no leaves, no green. Who needs chlorophyll when you're a filthy freeloader, right? These flowers get fertilized and the whole thing starts over. Just one of these guys isn't a big deal to the host. But once you get enough, they have the potential to suck an entire farm dry, causing sweeping crop failure. Pun definitely intended. Next is this one. There's a few different ways you can pronounce it depending on your social standing, ranging from ergit to elgo. Being the disheveled pauper I am, I prefer ergot. Rolls off the tongue, you know. Ergot is a fungus that mainly infects grains like wheat, barley, and especially rye. And it's capable of producing a whole soup of compounds called alkaloids, which can have a variety of effects on the human body. Most of them not fun, mostly spasms and diarrhea, that kind of thing. However, one particular alkaloid called ergotamine structurally resembles LSD and has a similar function when it enters the body. So a medieval peasant would be sitting there, eating a nice loaf of rye bread, just minding his own business. Then all of a sudden, holy shit, I'm blasting out of both ends! My heart's a seizing, my lungs a wheezing, the fucking walls are melting, I can hear Satan's voice, he's telling me to invest in Apple. What does that mean? Why does he want me to buy apples? This would go on for like a day. Sometimes their fingers and toes would fall off, but then they'd be alright. Unless they weren't. Moral of the story, kids, don't eat strange bread. You could trip balls and die.